It was the longest drive I've ever made, 4 straight hours up those winding mountain roads, my tires scraping the gravel like it was trying to tell me something. I had just left the familiar hum of city life behind to visit my grandfather's old cabin in the Blue Ridge foothills, a place that had always felt like home. Pine sap and stale coffee still lingered in the wood beams when I got there. It felt like stepping back in time. But then there it was. The chain-link fence cutting across my access, and behind it 6 spike strips, 6 sharp reminders that someone wanted to keep me out. And who was responsible for this? None other than the HOA president. Now let me paint the picture. I'm standing there, boots on the porch, staring up at this man. He's got that smug grin on his face, holding a cold beer like he's already won. Read the notice, he tells me, all proud of himself like he's some kind of king. I didn't say a word. I just nodded, turned around and drove off slowly, the sound of my tires on the gravel echoing like a final statement. I had 48 hours to figure out how I was going to make him regret this. And let me tell you, that's all it took. Because 2 days later I was back, and let's just say the man who thought he could take my land was the one who ended up with nowhere to go. So what would you have done in those 48 hours? You know, if someone tried to pull something like that on you. But let me back up a little, because none of this makes sense without a bit of history. My name's Garrett. I'm a third-generation owner of a little slice of land, 2.5 acres in the foothills of western North Carolina, land that my grandfather, Eldon Marsh, bought back in 1961. He wasn't some rich businessman. He wasn't buying up land to flip. No, he worked double shifts at a furniture mill to save up enough for it just so he could have somewhere peaceful, somewhere quiet to breathe. He built that cabin by hand over 3 summers, hauling cinder blocks up a logging road in a beat-up truck, one that had no business going up a mountain. My father added a second room in 1987, and I hooked up propane and a decent well pump in 2019. The cabin sits right on the edge of a development called Ridgeline Estates, a development that popped up in the early 2000s when a developer decided that nature made a nice backdrop for houses. So why not build a community there? Most of the other properties have those cookie-cutter vinyl houses with pressure-washed driveways and American flags that never come down no matter the weather. My cabin, though, it predates the HOA by 4 decades. That little detail, my friend, is about to become a huge part of this story. Enter Sterling Briggs, the guy who moved into the biggest house in Ridgeline Estates in 2018, a 4,200 square foot monster that he didn't build and could barely afford. Sterling was the type of guy who wore polo shirts to HOA meetings spouting off about things like aesthetics and property values. Yeah, that kind of guy. He had never been in a position of real authority in his life, and at the age of 52, he decided that being president of the HOA was the closest he'd ever get to running something. And so in 2020, he ran unopposed and got the job. Classic right. The first time Sterling came after me was in the summer of 2021. He sent me a letter, one with the HOA's official seal, telling me that my cabin's exterior didn't match the visual consistency of the community. At first I ignored it, but then came a second notice and a $200 fine. So I wrote back explaining that my property had been there long before the HOA ever existed, and that under North Carolina property law, they couldn't force me to make my cabin comply with their standards. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Wrong. The next notice came with a photograph of my cabin circled in red marker like it was homework he was grading. And it wasn't just me. My neighbor Darlene, who had lived there since 2003, told me that Sterling had tried this with 3 other homeowners. 2 of them caved. 1 of them moved. But here's the thing, Sterling thought he could bully everyone into compliance. And I was about to show him just how wrong he was. The following spring, Sterling didn't send another notice. Oh no, he sent a surveyor and then a fence crew. He filed paperwork with the HOA claiming that my driveway, a 40-foot gravel strip, had been abandoned and that it reverted to common HOA land. Then he had spike strips installed across it. I found out when I pulled up one Friday evening in April, only to hear the pop of my tires as they hit the spikes. There was no going back now. I didn't confront Sterling that night. I didn't let my anger take over. Instead, I called my cousin Vaughn, a paralegal in Asheville. He told me 6 words that became my mantra for the next 48 hours: don't argue, document, then bury him. The next morning, I drove back up the mountain with my brother-in-law, Colt, who's a contractor and has been doing surveying work in western North Carolina for 20 years. He brought his own surveying equipment and we spent hours reestablishing the boundary markers. What we found was shocking. Sterling's fence didn't just nick my driveway, it crossed 14 feet into my property. The spike strips were buried in my gravel. And by the way, those things were not your average spike strips, they were commercial grade, the kind trucking companies use. Sterling had committed trespassing and, more importantly, conversion of property, meaning he'd taken control of something that wasn't his. He'd even damaged my vehicle, opening the door for a civil claim. Now, I wasn't just dealing with a rude neighbor, I was dealing with a man who had crossed a legal line, and I was about to make sure he paid for it. The next move, I called an attorney. Not just any attorney, but one with experience in HOA litigation. Philippa Ahalt had been practicing property law for 19 years. And when she looked at the evidence, the survey data, the photos, the paperwork, she saw exactly what I saw. Sterling had made his first catastrophic mistake. He'd given me not just a trespass claim, but a personal injury claim and a claim for fraud. But Sterling wasn't done yet. Oh no, he decided to take it a step further and threaten me with foreclosure. He had the HOA management company send me a letter fining me $1,500 for obstruction of common area maintenance access. The irony was almost too much to handle. And here's where it gets interesting. Wendell, another neighbor, had been keeping his own file on Sterling. He had notes from HOA meetings, photographs of Sterling taking kickbacks and complaints he'd submitted that had been ignored. Wendell had been waiting for someone to fight back, and I was just the person to do it. By the time the HOA board meeting came around, we had everything lined up. We had the survey data, the TTRO, temporary restraining order, the petition to remove Sterling from the board, and even a journalist on our side. This was it. This was the moment Sterling had been building up to for years, and it was about to come crashing down. And crash it did. I walked into that meeting knowing exactly what I was going to do. I stood up, told Sterling exactly what had been happening, and showed everyone the evidence. The room fell silent, and then it was over. Sterling's reign as HOA president ended that night. But it wasn't just his position that he lost everything. Within months, he was foreclosed on, forced to leave the house he had been so proud of. As for me, I got to keep my land. I got to keep the cabin that my grandfather built, and I got to show everyone that when you stand up for what's right, you can win. And as I look back on it, I'm reminded of one thing: knowledge is power. Your property rights are only as strong as the documents you keep and the research you do. If someone like Sterling tries to take what's yours, don't fight with anger. Fight with knowledge. And hey, if you've ever been in a situation like this where someone tried to take what was yours, drop a comment below. What did you do? Did you fight back? Let's talk about it.